Hi everyone and welcome to today's Mayhem, a podcast brought to you by indie game studio Total Mayhem Games. My name is Nena and I am the community manager at TMG, and today I am with Lucia. So Lucia, welcome, and can you introduce yourself to our listeners?
Of course. Hi there. Thank you for having me again. My name is Lucia de Visser and I am currently the managing director at Total Mayhem Games, but I was also one of the founders of Total Mayhem Games back in the days, creating We Were Here.
Yes, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. So today we will discuss the lore of our second game, We Were Here 2. We want to make sure that everyone is up to date of the lore of the entire game series before the release of the upcoming game, We Were Here Forever, because these stories will become more important. So we already went over the lore of the first game, We Were Here. So in case you've missed it, we discussed that in a previous podcast. So don't forget to check it out to be up to date with the lore before listening to today's podcast. So yeah, one of the first things that I noticed when playing We Were Here 2 was that the ambience and the whole vibe is a bit darker. So can you tell us a bit more about that change in the scenery?
Of course. Well, as you may or may not know, We Were Here was made in a really short amount of time. We determined a visual style back then. It was very stylized because we thought it was really timeless and something we could all do within our team.
Yeah.
We got a lot of media attention. We Were Here grew. It was played by thousands of people. So we thought a lot about the visual style of the game, and us being pressured a little bit, we thought we had to go for a more serious kind of style. So we chose for this gloomy, eerie, kind of dark visual style for the next game.
Yeah.
We were working with different texture styles, but we kept the environmental models the same.
Yeah.
Because we really wanted it to feel like a true We Were Here game in the end. I think that the dark environmental theme also matches the story of We Were Here 2. It is kind of more darkish. You are doing and participating in this dark ritual. Yeah. You're escaping torture rooms, etc. So we kind of felt that it fit the whole new vibe we were going for We Were Here 2. Yeah. It was quite a leap, but we absolutely stood behind our choice.
Yeah.
Behind our choice.
All right. Yeah, I noticed the same when I played We Were Here 2 for the first time with my partner. You could immediately see the difference in the visual style, and we actually really liked it. It looked super good. So yeah, compared to the story of We Were Here, which we mentioned in the previous podcast, obviously, how does the story of this game, We Were Here 2, fit or relate to the story in the original game?
Well, Jessica also explained in the earlier podcast, the one before here of We Were Here, that the story of Castle Rock is behind this king, and he's been seeking immortality after the tragic death of his two sons. So he ended up signing a contract to kind of gain immortality, eternal life in this realm of his. So the story of We Were Here 2 is still in the same castle with the same backstory. We just learn about what really happened in the castle. That everything wasn't going that well. The signing with a demon is all kind of heavy. The stuff that happened in the meanwhile. Yeah,
exactly. So we learn more about what happened after everything went the wrong way, basically. Yeah. So in the beginning of We Were Here 2, there's mention of some dark ritual. And could you explain a bit more about this mysterious ritual?
Yeah, of course. Also, told in last podcast, the ritual took place to make Kim immortal, right? Oh, a funny thing about the gazebo. We have to stop the podcast right now because I forgot the gazebo downstairs. So I'm gonna grab it.
A few moments later.
So, the ritual actually took place in the gazebo. That is kind of a token for We Were Here 2. It's also one of the first things you see when you enter the game, actually. But we got it 3D printed. It's
oh my god! It's way cuter than what its purpose is used for.
Here. But it actually kind of became a token for us. This is for us. We Were Here 2. So really cute. I wish we had more of these. But
yeah, it's actually super nice. Nice. So the ritual took place in that gazebo that we can see in game. And how did this ritual work? What was the purpose?
Well, so how the ritual actually worked was because of his sons, who both died, he had to secure another way for him to become immortal, right? And
Yeah.
by this time, the jester had become his best friend and whispered all his things in his ear. So he actually whispered a plan into the ear of the king, but the king kind of got impatient and he decided to go for another route. So he turned to like another person for advice, except apart from his jester, let's say.
Yeah. Okay, and who was that?
That was Philippus. And Philippus was a priest to the common folk.
Okay.
But the king knew about his double life and that he had something to do with his occult practices. So that was kind of what he was looking for, because the other plan didn't go well enough and didn't go fast enough. And the king was growing old, so...
Impatient. So the king went to actually one of his generals, Philippus. And so that's the person who made him sign the contract that we discussed with Jessica in the previous podcast, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So Philippus summoned a demon and struck a deal with the king. The demon struck a deal with the king, basically. But the demon ended up betraying the king because he didn't read the fine print, basically.
Yeah.
So what happened, the king was able to rule over his kingdom for eternity, but it never really defined where. So that is kind of the place where we are now, in the Antarctics. So
Yes.
Bummer.
Yep, that's how we ended up there, being doomed, basically. In the previous podcast on the lore of We Were Here, we already talked about the explorers and who they are. And we know that in the game they were a group of 4 and that they got stuck in a blizzard. So does that mean that the 2 explorers that we play now in We Were Here 2 are related to the explorers that we see in the first game?
Well, they're not literally related, like in family, but they live together in a base camp that's located in Antarctica.
Yeah.
They are like explorers that go around and find out everything that's living on Antarctica, like typical exploration posts,
Yeah.
They were actually a group of 8, but as we've seen in We Were Here, like half of the group, they got stuck in a blizzard, and then they got separated. You play the first half in We Were Here, and now the second half of the group in We Were Here 2.
Yeah, all right. I really like that idea. Actually wonder if they will ever get the chance to meet up with the others again. In We Were Here Too, the topic revolves kind of around the connection between the king and his 4 generals. So could you explain to us who these 4 generals are?
Yeah, well, in the original story, you had 4 generals. One was called Brutus, one was called Philippus, Jacobus, and Christian, as we would say in Dutch.
Yeah.
We Were Here 2 focuses thematic on prison ward Brutus. You see visuals of him around the whole game. It explains also a little bit more like why the game is so dark, why there's like torture devices everywhere, this gigantic room with this spiky wall coming towards you.
Yeah.
It is also like the most dark themed game in the series. He wasn't really a pleasant character. He was you could really sense his warlord revolution vibe throughout the whole game. So that's kind of intertwined with the whole theme, basically. So he was sadly involved in the death of the heir of King Bartholomeus, his son Jan, and the husband of his daughter Valdemar.
And so you mentioned 4 generals. So who are the other 3 generals?
Well, you first have the priest Philippus, who I talked about earlier.
Yeah.
He's like a bony old man with a double agenda. He's a man sent by God, and he advised everyone on religious matters.
Yeah.
Then we had the 3rd general. His name was Jacobus. He was actually king's advisor. He was like an old sage, kind of rebellious. He was enlightened.
Yeah.
And he mostly advised about well-beings and politics. His 4th general, which is actually a very interesting one, was King's Guard Christian. And Christian always dressed up in armor to cover up a very big secret, and that was that he was the king's mistress, Christina.
He was the king's mistress. What do you mean?
Well, Christian was actually Christina, and nobody was allowed to know that the guard was a woman. Because the whole kingdom thought that Christian was like the first guard of the king. He was always with the king. He was always secretly with the king. But everybody thought he was just like this big armored guy, Didn't talk much except for some uhs and yes and whatever.
Yeah.
So nobody actually knew what was underneath the whole armor.
Yeah, well, that's quite a big secret to keep. Must be very hard, I can assume. So yeah, a love story in the castle. That's wild. So yeah, that was basically the lore, the most important parts of the lore, most important parts of the story of We Were Here Too in a nutshell. But we're not completely done yet. Before we completely close off the We Were Here chapter or the We Were Here Too chapter, last podcast we asked you guys a question related to a puzzle in We Were Here Too, and the question was, what is the story behind the battleboard puzzle in We Were Here Too? So, Lucia, what is the story behind the battleboard puzzle?
Well, of course, I actually already spoiled quite a bit about the puzzle because a lot of story about the battleboard puzzle is already told before in this podcast.
Yeah.
But it actually is a story about the loss of the royal sons, the Crown Prince Jan van Amber Adelaide, Jan of Amber Adelaide, and the husband of Emilia, the Danish Valdemar, the Prince Valdemar. The name Amber Adelaide is not something we just came up with. It's actually a synonym of the Dutch name Van Oranje-Nassau, as you may have heard of the royal family here in the Netherlands. Amber is a shade of orange, and Oranje means orange, and Adelaide is a village in Nassau, so I took a name that's close to Nassau. It's actually in the Bahamas. So that was my little fun fact of today.
Yeah, I did not even know that before I discovered it here. So the more I know.
So let's continue. Continue. Let's continue with the puzzle. What the king speaks about his loss. You recreate the battle that actually happened with the two sons and Brutus in the puzzle. You can hear him talking about victory, but it was at the cost of the two sons, let's say. Bartholomeus doesn't specifically know that his supposed own allies are the ones that are behind the killing of his son, so that's very, very tragic.
So yeah, it's a puzzle with a sad ending, unfortunately. But yeah, this basically explains the battleboard puzzle. So some of you guys guessed it right in the comments in the next podcast, so well done.
Yeah, before we go on, I wanted to also say that there's actually in this specific level, because we thought the battleboard puzzle was it's kind of a big highlight in the game. It tells so much story and it's very rich with intrigue, basically. So we actually disguised 3 Easter eggs in that specific area. The first one is, we show a video, if you jump up some towers or whatever, you see a sentence and it says, I keep you in the holes. Well, I don't know if you can remember from We Were Here, and maybe it's also shown in the last podcast. We have a cat and an arrow make strange jumps, right?
Yeah.
Which is literally translated also from a Dutch saying.
Yeah.
This one is also literally translated, so it means absolutely nothing except for if you translate it directly into Dutch.
Yeah.
And in Dutch it says, ik hou je in de gaten, which literally means I keep my eye on you. So it was just a developer fun.
Yeah, I keep you in the holes.
Yeah, I keep you in the holes. Which nothing, of course. Then the second one is if you jump a little bit further, you see, Grats, you have earned an invisible medal. We say that because we never thought people would jump around that much that they would find it. So here's your invisible medal.
That's such
really
a cool idea.
Finding this second Easter egg.
Oh, nice.
But then there's a third, and if you jump to the other side of the area again, there is a sentence that says, "It's a secret to everybody," and there lays this big sword. And this is actually about Brutus being responsible for the death of Jan and Valdemar.
So next podcast, we will focus on the lore of our third game, We Were Here Together. To prepare you for the next podcast, we want to test your knowledge of the game again with a new question. So the question of today's podcast will be, whose soul gets trapped in the dagger in the post-credit cutscene in We Were Here Together? So, if you know the answer, leave it down below in a comment and we will discuss this during the next podcast. So, yeah, that brings us to an end of today's mayhem. So, thank you all so much for watching and listening. And Lucia, thank you so much for being here. And next podcast, we'll dive into We Were Here Together. So, definitely stay tuned and we see you guys next time. Bye.
Thank you for listening.
See ya. Several players of the community mentioned that in We Were Here Too, they can find a lot of books around with letters. So what are these books exactly?
Yes, during the game, you're able to find several books and letters which are filled with like intrigues of the family. So kind of few books kind of speak for themselves. They're like really straightforward and not that hard to understand. But I want to highlight a few of those. So I'm going to take my notes because I don't want to do this wrong. Let's say the first one is a letter that's from a mysterious person. It's to King Bartholomeus. You actually think the letter is from Queen Leonora because we used like a very sneaky font for it. It could be like an L, it could be a C. It's not really easy to determine which of the two it could be. But it's actually a letter from the King's Guard, Christina, to King Bartholomeus. So we kind of wanted to scramble things around a little bit and make you a bit confused. Then there's another letter. And that one is from Bartholomeus to Christina, which we also kind of try to make you confused if it was to Leonora or back and forth, you know. It kind of changes perspective in the whole thing if you now realize that it's not from the king to the queen, but actually to and from his mistress. Later in game, under the stairs, you encounter a diary entry from King Bartholomeus. He talks there about like the loss of his sons and the enormous grief he had towards Queen Leonora, also because, of course, it's also her children. She was very, very sad about this. But he kind of already knew that his stubbornness and his trust in Brutus could have been kind of a reason for his death. So, that's what that book figures out. And then in another book, that's a log from Brutus. It got written all over it, what have I done? In bloodstains. There is shown actually two people he single-handedly took care of, which are Jan and Valdemar. We wanted to show that he kind of realized later, after he wrote it down and after the war was over, that he was maybe one of the reasons that led the kingdom into the situation we are today, and that is the loss of his lineage, the losing of heirs, creating this whole situation where there became a deal with the devil because maybe the jester was working together with Brutus a little bit, and he found out that things weren't that great as he was told it would be, basically. So I thought those were the most interesting ones to tell about because they actually show a lot of intrigue that was going on behind the scenes of the kingdom and the royal family, basically.